We are now joined by Dan Perry. He is a world affairs analyst, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv in Israel. Dan, thank you very much for joining us. Dan, this is the third evacuation order of the day after Israel continued to target these high-rise buildings. There's been a lot of criticism that the new humanitarian designated area, as Israel is calling it, is under pressure, supplies are short, and people there also fear their lives since Israeli strikes have happened there previously. Can I get your thoughts, and can you address those critics of people who are concerning themselves with that?
Oh, no one can diminish the very real catastrophe that's happening to the population of Gaza. And whereas I don't think Israel targets the humanitarian areas as such, it's very clear that there is a dire shortage of food and medicine and housing capacity. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people living in tents. But on the other hand, there is certainly an understandable side to Israel's desire to compel the population to leave Gaza City in order to enable them to clear Hamas out of Gaza City. Hamas thrives and strategically insists on embedding itself in the civilian population precisely for the purpose of making any attack on itself be very damaging to civilians and therefore damaging reputationally to Israel and catastrophic in general. So the whole thing is unbelievably ugly. It is understandable that Israel wants to, eliminate what remains of Hamas in Gaza City, because to end the war with Hamas somehow still in power, even if governing ruins, more or less, would be seen across the region as a capitulation by Israel and as some version of a victory for Hamas in a twisted calculus of Middle East jihadist politics. As for targeting these buildings, it's problematic because, obviously these are civilian buildings, but on the other hand, Israel argues not without reason that many of these buildings, I would guess they would say all these buildings, are also used for military purposes, be it sniper nests or lookout positions or weapons depots, or even for firing missiles in the past. And certainly that they're booby-trapped. So you're looking at an Israel that no longer tries very hard to justify each specific case because they're basically in despair of the whole situation and very eager just to get it over with. And you're looking at a Hamas that is absolutely capable of trying to bring about damage to its own population because of its own twisted and demonic calculations. It's horrible, and I don't even know what to say to my friends in Gaza City and in the Strip in general. It's just a nightmare. I've said before on your show, the remarkable thing is that under these circumstances, Hamas still doesn't surrender. I can't hardly think of a force in history that wouldn't, especially considering that we're not talking about a capitulation of the Palestinian or Gazan people. The Palestinian Authority, the Arab League, even Hamas's sponsor in Qatar and the entire West and 142 countries out of 152 that voted in the UN 2 days ago are calling on Hamas to disarm and to allow the Palestinian Authority to take over Gaza and begin a reconstruction. It's simply a catastrophe. That is my analysis.
Dan, we'll have more from this joint Arab summit tomorrow. However, I just want to get your view on Iran's Ali Larijani's statements, and he's called for joint operations against Israel. How seriously do you think Israel views this as a threat? If you could analyze the relationship Iran has with the Gulf, which is of course where these leaders are meeting tomorrow, and what we might expect from that.
I think Israel views Iran as a threat, or more accurately, the Islamic Republic government in Iran as a threat. But I don't think today's statement by Larijani is relevant to very much. And in general, such is the skullduggery of the regional politics in the region that much of what is said in public, I think, needs to be ignored. Uh, Iran is at loggerheads with the Gulf countries, with a possible partial exception of Qatar, which Iran attacked during the 12-day war with Israel, albeit attacking a U.S. base in Qatar. Remember, Qatar, even though it tries to be friends with everyone and has some ties with Iran, also hosts the largest U.S. air base and naval base in the region for thousands of miles around, which is only tens of miles from Iran. And as for the rest of the Sunni countries in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, I mean, they are enemies of Iran, essentially. And the idea that they would cooperate with Iran against Israel is pretty close to absurd. Moreover, Iran's theocratic regime is guilty of undermining the sovereignty of a wide swath of Arab countries with their proxy militias. I'm talking about Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hezbollah also in Syria during the Assad regime, and the Houthis in Yemen that have caused the deaths of 500,000 Yemenis, and of course Hamas in the Palestinian areas, which has undermined the PA, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which is allied with Iran, which is a terrorist organization declared by the Egyptian government, and of course the Shiite militias backed by Iran in Iraq, which attack U.S. interests in that area and also undermine the sovereignty of Iraq, even though that's complex, since Iraq partly funds them. Iran is absolutely meddling with the Arab world and trying to exploit the current unpleasantness between Israel and Qatar to achieve some benefit, which I don't think will work. That is not to say that tomorrow's event in Doha will be without consequences, because Qatar is really angry at the violation of its sovereignty, which is indisputable, that Israel did. But in a broader sense, there's a big mystery around that issue, because if we are to believe the public posture of the U.S., that claims that they were not complicit in and acquiescent to the Israeli missile strike from the Red Sea last week on the Hamas meeting in Doha, well, that would mean that Israel took a gamble so reckless with upsetting the U.S., its main patron without whom it cannot continue the war in Gaza, that it is literally unbelievable. So my suspicion is that the U.S. is lying. And therefore there's a big pretense happening in the region right now, and people are going through emotions. I could be wrong, and we'll know more, I suppose, perhaps after the Rubio meetings in Israel, and indeed after the Doha conference. I would expect these countries, which have been at loggerheads with Qatar for parts of the past decade over Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood, to issue statements, declarations, maybe threaten again to establish an Arab NATO-type superstructure, which doesn't seem to me to be realistic, but it would be a signal that they're very unhappy. I could also envision the UAE taking some steps like returning their ambassador from Israel, or maybe even announcing a re-examination of the peace treaty with Israel. But my sense is somehow they're going to find a way to be pro forma with their protestations, but get over it. To a degree, Qatar can see this as a win, because Israel can't do it again. Given the
Yes.
wall-to-wall condemnation, I think it was one and done, and now it's, even though Israel thinks the immunity of Hamas leaders in Qatar has been shattered, in fact, it might have been reinforced.
Yes, Dan, do stay with us to discuss further updates. Dan Perry joins us once again. Dan, we are reporting on these Houthi missiles and drones that are sent over on a near daily basis. However, in the broader spectrum of the Houthis' objectives here and Israel's mind to defend them, if the Houthi attacks do continue, would Israel consider a direct retaliation in Yemen, or is this merely the strategy here to contain them through defense only?
Oh, they've already struck in Yemen. Israel struck several times at the port of Hodeidah, at the airport in Sana'a. They just 10 days ago took out half the Houthi so-called government, including the prime minister, who was essentially assassinated by Israel. So they've taken steps. The question is whether they're willing to escalate the steps, and part of the calculus here is that the Houthi missiles seem to be easily interceptable. In the entire almost 2 years of Houthi attacks on Israel, um, ostensibly to support the Palestinians in Gaza. One person has been killed. Now that's a tragedy, of course, but it may not be enough to drag Israel into
Mm.
war with the part of Yemen occupied by the Houthis. They could take more drastic action. They might try to find a way to assassinate the very well protected and very stealthy Abdel Malik al-Houthi, who is the head of the entire Houthi mafia, and whose death may move the needle, change the equation, maybe bring them to heel. I suppose they could also blockade the port of Hodeidah, but and entirely. I mean, put it completely out of commission, and that would cause great damage to civilians in Yemen. And I think Israel, that has suffered great reputational and other damage because of the harm it has brought to civilians in Gaza, isn't eager to face something similar about, killings of civilians in Yemen. So the Houthis are deploying the same jihadist strategy, which is to create a situation where to defeat them, you have to kill people around them, civilians and children and so forth. And then the world, in its sort of simplistic view, sees you as the aggressor. And so Israel and everyone, the West, don't have great options. I think the Houthis, who have caused directly or indirectly the deaths of about 500,000 Yemenis since taking over much of Yemen about a decade ago, um, and who rule by torture and criminality, and who have presided over a disastrous cholera epidemic caused by their actions, need to be seen as uh, a regional problem. And the Arab world, if they want to be useful tomorrow in Doha, need to also pay some attention to this. Remember that the UAE and Saudi Arabia, for some years, tried to fight the Houthis and
Yes.
sadly were unsuccessful. I think they may want to resume that at this point, that the Houthis have caused so much damage, not just to Yemen, and are risking so much further escalation by continually attacking Israel, but also over the past 2 years, even though of late they've somewhat stopped, have badly disrupted global maritime trade, about a quarter of which goes through the Red Sea up to the Suez Canal, and in so doing have badly harmed Egypt's economy, which depends on foreign currency revenue in the Suez Canal. The Houthis are a scourge, and
Okay.
it shouldn't just be Israel's problem.
Yes, Dan Perry, thank you very much for giving us your insight on that topic.